Are we live yet? We're just giving it a couple of seconds to kick into gear because we're way out here in Little River, so it's take a while.
We are live. I just going to pause you to do it.
Okay, we are live. So what we need to do next, come back into this meeting. Part of this meeting is I'll get the board to move that Luana, Tyrone, and Howard are not here for this part, absent. So we've got Nigel and Kathy to second. And all those in favour? Against? And that is carried. Thank you. Thank you for your patience. Richard, please go ahead with your presentation.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for getting me in at the last minute. I need to start with an apology to apologise why I'm so late actually delivering this. I was under the understanding that it was going to be delivered by someone else, and then we realised that it hadn't been, so apologies for that. But what I'd like to do is just spend a few minutes going through our Sportsville Network Plan. As I understand it, the City and Banks Peninsula Christchurch City Council hasn't had a very good strategic approach to the provision of sports fields. And this document is very much a strategic document. It's not a document that will address individual sites, because the document is the process by which we will address individual sites. So just to start off with that. So what it's intending to do is really to provide a framework. It's all about understanding what we're aiming towards and how that would work in the provision of sports fields. You're probably aware with the last couple of winters, perhaps not so much on the Banks Peninsula, but certainly in the city, we have struggled through many winter periods with long periods of closure due to unplayable sports fields. Perhaps with the rapid growth of housing and demographics, we've got some parks that are underutilised and some that are overutilised. So this is a mechanism by which we'll address all of those issues to plan for the next 10 years. Now, it does focus very much on natural turf sports fields, but that isn't its sole intent, because it will take into account artificial or synthetic sports surfaces, hard surfaces, and artificial turf ones as well. So what we've been doing really since about November last year, perhaps a bit earlier, is to work very much with the regional sports associations and Sport Canterbury to work on this plan, which included some workshops. It looked at some projects that potentially were on the top of the priority list. We looked very much at feedbacks from the regional sports organisations and their clubs in order to come up with a first cut of the plan. That was briefed by the head of parks to full council the end of last August. We then went for a legal review, whether we would need to consider public consultation in implementing this plan. We then received final feedback, we finalised the plan, and we're now at the stage of briefing the community boards in the expectation that it will be presented to full council on the 15th of May, in just over a week, to adopt the plan. And it's very much been put together in tandem with the finance that has been proposed through the draft LTP. So in a nutshell, the plan, it's a high-level plan, and it really focuses on 3 goals. And it's a bit difficult to accommodate some of these goals in the as far as Banks Peninsula is concerned, because it's such a large area with a very spread out population. But nevertheless, the main goal is that, goal 1 is that citizens can participate where they live. So there needs to be a facility of some sort that is within a reasonable distance of where people live. And that's very much aimed at junior players, so that they don't have to traipse from one end of town to the other, or travel long distances. I guess from the community in Banks Peninsula, that's a little bit difficult to achieve, because clearly, whilst there is some sport out there, a lot of the sport may be in the main city. The second goal is that we want to allow what we've called play for life. And that means having the infrastructure that will support, continuous ability to participate all through one's ages as you get older. And you'll see that the way in which that has been put together is to have a series of artificial turf hubs around the city that can support that goal. And then finally, the goal 3 is all about making sure that we have some sports fields of sufficient quality, natural turf ones in particular, that can enable that higher level community sport. And that's quite hard to achieve because high quality in the modern sense of the words for sports fields implies for a lot of people that we need a Wembley Stadium type surface, which is very expensive. And we have to just manage that expectation quite well. We do have a network of high quality fields. They're the ones that will drain very well through the winter. But like any natural turf surface, they only have a finite ability to support a level of use. And if you overuse them, then clearly they get quite damaged. And then amongst those 3 goals, we've got to make sure that we balance all the other recreational needs and uses of parks. Of course, parks are not just for sports, they're for events, passive use, dog walking, casual walking, all sorts of other demands. And sport is but one demand. So the way in which the network has been, if you like, analysed is to look at the spatial network of where have we got existing facilities. And I struggled to get a map that was big enough to include the Banks Peninsula without making Christchurch look very small, which probably would satisfy you, but may not satisfy everyone in the city. And there are probably, I think, about 5 sports parks within the Banks Peninsula that this plan would come under, starting at the ones closest to the city, Diamond Harbour and Littleton Recreation Ground, which I can talk about in a minute too, and then further out towards Akaroa and so on. So we have a system where we can identify all the different parks with sports fields that currently exist to see where our shortfalls might be. But in the implementation of Goal 1, which is participating close to where you live, we looked at what would happen if we looked at all the areas that are more than 1 kilometre from a park that contained a sports field. Now that methodology doesn't really apply to the Banks Peninsula because a lot of people on the fringes of the peninsula would live a long way from a park with a sports field. But if you look at how that works for the city, we end up with this sort of arrangement where we would end up with the red areas there is where you're more than 1 kilometre from a park with a sports field. So all the green areas, the dark and the green areas are the light green are parks with sports field, and the dark areas are other community parks where potentially a smaller type facility could be installed. You can see here Littleton, well, not much we can do about that being on the side of a hill, but that's why that area is red. But we've got Diamond Harbour, Stoddart Point here, and this is the way that we would certainly plan for the city. But I must admit, I'm not quite sure how we would use that same application on the peninsula. I think we would simply work through the individual sites on a case-by-case basis, which we're already doing. The other thing too is that we need to make sure that the Sports Field Network plan ties in with other council plans, and in particular the Urban Forest Plan, which I think you'll be aware of. This is where we're looking to increase the tree canopy around the city to 40% if we can achieve it, and looking at areas within sports parks where we can carry out planting that wouldn't interfere with the sports field use. Another one there that is quite relevant is the Christchurch Transport Plan. we're looking at sites that, if we're going to develop them, are going to be easily accessible by public transport. And the sort of issues that we're having to consider, certainly within the city, and they're changing things quite a bit, are housing intensification, increasing that population density in smaller areas, changes to the urban form, which really goes with the housing intensification. Increasing demand for park use. We've got new sports that are sort of coming to the fore, like disc golf, for example, and that changes our sports field use. It might not just be the conventional sports that we're used to, but other sports coming on. Big one there, climate resilience, and that's really all about utilising our parks as mechanisms to reduce flooding risk. In the last 2 winters, we've had a couple of parks that have flooded quite significantly, and the water has not gone into people's houses, but it's certainly gone into their properties. And we're looking at a way now in which we can design new sports fields and in a way that they attenuate the stormwater so that it doesn't increase the capacity of the stormwater system. And then the final point there, which is really probably one of the most important, is this demand now, because of the heavier rainfalls that we're getting, that we have a demand for all-weather training and play. And that can only be realistically achieved by having artificial turf surfaces. So if we look through the individual goals, the goal 1, participate where you live, what we're looking at there is minimising negative impacts associated with unnecessary travel. So a family where they might have to deliver one child to one end of the city and another child somewhere else, all that travel that goes with it, we're trying to design a network that would reduce that as much as is feasible in the distances that we're working to. We're providing an opportunity to contribute to carbon neutral goals in a meaningful way, and that really comes down to the trying to reduce the private travel. We're looking at, in this particular goal, for having venues and facilities that are predominantly set up for juniors, where if there isn't a large sports field hub near to where they live, at least there might be some facility where they can carry out short-term training sessions. And all of this really was with the aim of relieving pressure on parents and minimising barriers to participation. So you'll see some examples in a minute of what that actually means in practice. Goal 2 is about the Playing for Life, and this is all about the all-weather development of all-weather facilities, where we're looking to have artificial turf hubs that can support sports all year round, don't get closed because of the weather, and don't become unplayable because they turn into mud heaps in the middle of winter. And I think, unlike hockey, which has gone down this route, but clearly charges for the use of their facilities, at this stage we are working through how these facilities might be used in terms of paying for them or not paying for them. Certainly with the idea of reducing any barriers to participation. And then goal 3 was all about being able to succeed at that higher level. And this really requires us being able to monitor the sports fields to a higher degree than probably we currently do, so that we can adjust our maintenance and capital investment plans based on the performance of the sports fields. But the idea here is that if we have a hub of artificial turf, that will relieve the pressure on all the natural turf facilities in the city in order, hopefully, to reduce our maintenance and renovation costs. And we're very much looking at hybrid turf. I don't know if you've come across that expression before. That's where you have a mixture of natural and artificial turf. It started off with the professional football in Europe, and has now developed to such an extent, and the cost has come down so that it is now being considered by local authorities. So Auckland Council have decided to go down this route, and we're looking at it here. It doesn't make natural turf bulletproof, but it certainly improves the ability of the turf to sustain greater levels of use. Just recently too, I've been looking at irrigation technology. That's another big cost, where we can have, instead of watering from above, where you get quite a lot of loss, we will put a subsurface system in where the turf is irrigated from below ground, and you wouldn't know it was there. But the big point with this, and in fact with all the goals, is that we are now, instead of just us as a council saying, this is what we're going to do and this is where we're going to do it, we will work much more closely with the regional sports organisations and have meetings with them to determine and prioritise our capital investment programmes. I think to date, one of the issues for us is we've been very much, whoever speaks loudest tends to get the ear, and the best way for us, when we've got lots of competing organisations wanting their facilities upgraded, that we get them all in the room together and we can come to some consensus on how the money is to be spent. This is the proposal for the artificial turf hubs around the city, 6 of them, each of them having 2 artificial turf sports fields per hub. They won't necessarily be all of the same design or all of the same type. We may have one hub, for example, is much more multi-use than the other ones, but this is what we intend to work through. And then the other aspect, but this is really aligned to goal number 1, participate where you live. This is where we're looking at the introduction more of the multi-sport zones, hard surface courts, which can have 2 or 3 sports played on them: basketball, futsal, netball, potentially, I guess, volleyball, depending on how they're laid out. And the idea with these is that we dot these around the city and the peninsula, and we provide a flexible and casual training use, so that, for example, if the natural turf fields are rained off during the week for training, junior teams in particular can still gather at these sites and carry out some form of training practice. So we're just about to install one of these at the Littleton Recreation Ground. It will be the first in the city. Just a quick look at some of the other things we've been looking at. This is the hybrid turf. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but this is where a machine that stitches artificial turf into a natural turf sports field. We trialled a small area of this at Ferrymead Park last year. I have to say it wasn't hugely welcomed by the sports clubs. I think they were expecting that the surface would turn into a sort of bulletproof field that could take 15-20 hours a week of use. It certainly can increase the use, but it won't stop the grass from being worn away. But what it will do is reduce the amount of damage that is caused to the surface. And the beauty of this is it's a machine that can just turn up on site, it can do its work. If there's a game at the end of the day, it can go off the field, come back on the next day. So it's very efficient in the way of implementation, because we don't need consent. And it doesn't need to be installed all at one time, and you don't need to close the field to do this sort of work. Here's an example of that in the middle of winter. You probably can't see too much there, but down this bit is where the stitching was, and you can see that the muddiness is less than it is over here, where there's no stitching. And if you look at a close-up of that, this is where the hybrid has been in. You've lost the grass, but the surface levels are maintained. Whereas where we don't have the hybrid, you've got a lot more surface damage from footmarks. This is a
Richard, just before you go on, how long does that hybrid, how long does the nylon stuff stay in the ground? Does it, what kind of life experience or lifetime does it have?
We would probably have a depreciation of 10 years for it. Certainly ones I worked on in the UK, they were around after 15 years, although they wouldn't have had the same level of use as a community park.
Okay.
But
Fine.
yeah, it does require a certain type of maintenance. You have to make sure the fibers don't get buried, and therefore they lose their effect. So you have to make sure in the renovation, we sort of scratch the surface right down to expose the fibers and start again.
All right. Makes sense. Thank you.
This is a park, Linwood Park, where I was looking at putting in subsurface irrigation. And the reason for doing that is that we don't have any above ground infrastructure that could get damaged or vandalized. And it's a more efficient way of applying the water from reducing losses. The only difficulty is you don't really know it's there, and it's quite hard to tell how much water you've put on. So we have to install moisture meters to see how wet the soil is, because we can't really see what's going on above ground at all. But again, that system could be operating. You could be having a game, you wouldn't even know it was there. So it's a good sort of option for some parks. Obviously, no good if you've got a lot of stones everywhere, but good for certain profiles. I thought while I've got the opportunity, I'll just give a quick update on Littleton, because I know you'll all be familiar with that. Where that's at is that the fields, the natural turf fields, were upgraded in 2 stages. The original intention was always to do this between the 2 SailGP events, and then suddenly we found that wasn't going to be happening. So we had to work a little bit around the event that's just occurred, but we did a lot of preventative maintenance and proactive stuff to make sure that SailGP didn't do any damage to the fields, because they'd just been sown at that point. So stage 1, which is on the east side near the existing changing rooms, that is, in fact, I'm meeting the rugby club there on Wednesday this week, and we're going to open that up for training, and its first game is on May the 18th. Stage 2, which is on the west, needs a bit more establishment time, so we'll cordon that off until probably about the end of June, maybe a bit later. In the top right picture there, you can see that this is again a new development. What we've got here, we've got 3 artificial turf hard court surfaces, an artificial turf training pad at the top. That's the dark green blob. Sorry, I can't find my mouse. There it is. Up here is artificial turf. We've then got our multi-sport zone here, which will be principally futsal and basketball and some netball training. And then at the bottom, we've got a netball court down here. There's going to be a shed built here for the storage, and the main changing rooms are going to be in this area here between the 2 hard courts. So my role in this is to get the sports fields open, get the 3 artificial hard court surfaces built, and then the pavilion is being managed by someone else. So in terms of finances, this is what we're looking at. We have put in a request for an additional $50 million over the next 10 years to support this development. And it'll be split amongst the 3 goals, as you can see there. We've got goal 1, which is basically improving some of our junior areas and providing the multi-sport zones. Goal 2, up to 6 artificial turf hubs. So that's 12 fields, that's quite a lot. And then goal 3 is up to 20 hybrids for the number 1 club fields. Now, whether that's a stitch system or some other system, that's still open to individual site assessment. And this is really just going back to the first slide. This is what we're looking is that we're now finalising the plan, and we basically have been presented it to all the community boards, all the sports organisations have seen it. It now goes to go with this presentation to full council on the 15th of May and to be voted on for adoption. And there we are.
Great, thank you. That was very informative. No doubt we've got questions in regards to your presentation, and we've got Nigel from Akaroa here who's got a question.
Yeah, we've got a recently established Banks Peninsula Sports Club in Akaroa, and they have received some council funding to fix up the tennis courts, which are unplayable and dangerous.
Yes.
But they were going to have a multi-purpose artificial turf court there, and they're going out, cooking at night to raise money and doing all sorts of things for $100,000. Why have they not been put on the list? Why is this then? Are we not part of Christchurch? This is a good example, and I'm not taking away from what you're doing. You're doing a fantastic job, but here again, I feel like we've just been left off, forgotten about.
Yeah, I mean, it's a valid point for sure. I guess the first point is that the Sportsfield Network Plan isn't specifically addressing tennis courts. There is
This is a multi-use what I'm talking about. There's a skill ring as well.
Well, I've caught up with Megan Carpenter, who is the planner for that area, and as far as I can see, there is no reason why funding for the multi-sport zones wouldn't cover the tennis court development out at Akaroa. So one of the things that our plan wouldn't include, for example, would be lighting. But one of the things I'm sure that it could include in Akaroa would be lighting, if there's already funding to develop some of the courts anyway. So I'd like to say that the development of a multi-court zone in Akaroa would be able to be part funded at least by this Sportsfield Network Plan once we get the funding.
Right.
I'm pretty sure that I'm pretty confident about that. Just talking to Megan.
In meeting with our manager, I think they did talk about putting the basic power lines in the system without installing them, so that in the future, if there is some funding available to install the lights, then that could be done without ripping up ground. Is that still the case?
Yeah, we would always look to put ducting in for power. In fact, at Littleton, that's exactly what we've done. The whole site has got ducting in for lighting everything.
Okay, brilliant.
Historically, I guess the council hasn't paid for sports lighting. Clubs tend to put their own in, but we'd be foolish not to put the ducting in. The last thing we want is to dig it all up after the event.
Nigel again.
Sorry, it was a bit of a softer question. The environmental impact of hybrid turf, is that nylon then just going to end up going into the stormwater and into the harbours?
No, it's not like a microplastic that you would get as little bits. I mean, these are strands that are 400 millimeters long, and they're injected 200 millimeters deep. I mean, there is machinery that at the end of its useful life can strip the stuff back out and separate it from the growing medium and recycle it. And the way the whole artificial turf industry is going now is very much down that line. The European Union has, I think, given 8 years for the artificial turf industry to find a different way of supplying the infill for artificial turf, for example. And already these surfaces have to be designed so that plastic is basically not washed into the stormwater system. They have filters around the edge of these things that capture it.
Yeah.
Kathy from Littleton.
From Littleton, it's very true. It's all red around Littleton, too many hills. So in terms of other users of a flat space, it would be the dog walkers. So I think in Littleton, that's another kind of use area we need to think about at some point.
I don't understand why we allow. I got into trouble many years ago with Auckland Council where I gave an opinion as a consultant to the council, and it ended up on the front page of the New Zealand Herald from a lot of people who didn't agree. Unfortunately, I'd just gone overseas again, so I didn't get it direct. But I mean, I have a dog. I can't fathom the idea of having dogs on sports fields. It's very difficult when there's such a shortage of space. And how you prevent it, I don't know. It's a tricky one.
Yeah, because the dog bylaws will come up too, and there's quite a few restrictions. So I think Littleton's going to have bigger things to think about.
Yeah, I mean, we have the
Yeah.
same problem at Lancaster Park, which just opened a year or so ago.
There has to be a viable alternative that's
Yeah.
close enough, which
Yeah.
has been advocating for some time.
My question is in regards to how you've done your areas and what is called a reasonable distance from your home, being 1 kilometre within like the city, and
Yes,
that Banks Peninsula is approached on a case-by-case basis, and that does make sense, but my concern is that there could be disadvantages due to this case-by-case, because instead of looking at BP separately with a whole lot of different KPIs, I guess, I don't know whether that's the word you use, but so that you can go, well, we're at least achieving what we want to. I can see how that would be easy to do within the city, because you can say, right, this is within 1 kilometre. But I'm wondering if that's some of the reason why Banks Peninsula feels like it falls through the cracks sometimes, because it is case by case. So there's no kind of motivation to have it, you know, compared. Are we doing what we need to be doing because it's case by case?
well, what the network plan addresses as one of its actions is to develop an objective mechanism to determine priorities.
Yeah.
And I've been working on that just over the last few weeks, and there are two parts to it. The first part is all about the agronomy and the soils. Does the area drain, and can it be used? You know, how bad is it in winter, and so on. And the second part to it is all about equity and facilities. Nothing to do with the ground itself, the grass bit, but to do with has it got a decent supporting infrastructure, and you know, how many people use it, and so on. What we want to very much do is to work through the regional sports organisations, for them, through their club members and community boards, to give us, for each sport, a list of their top 3 priorities.
Okay.
We'll then put those through this objective framework, and it's basically a grading system. We'll do that internally, and then we'll meet with the RSOs to nut out how we make, well, look at their scores first of all, and then to see how our priority list can be formed. Because certainly what I want to do is rather than every year thinking, what are we going to do next, and listen to the squeaky wheel club who says our fields are the worst, is to have a whole 10-year program agreed in advance, so that we know exactly where we're going to be spending the money and in what year. I don't think we've done that really all that successfully to date.
No, you're right. So is this framework is separate from this plan, isn't it? Is that what you're saying?
Well, the methodology of the framework isn't in the framework because we're still developing it.
Right.
But the process, if I look at one of the actions, what the action actually says is basically work with the national sports organisations and the regional sports organisations to determine and prioritise capital investment programmes.
Right.
Now, it may be that the voice from the Banks Peninsula needs to come from the community board, because I don't know how much involvement you would have with the regional sports organisations.
Well, individually in specific areas we would have relationships, but it's maybe to make sure that overall all of the areas that we feel need to be represented are being represented.
Yes.
Probably just for more of that, like broader. What do you think, team? Do you think maybe that just overview?
Yeah, it's because we know our area. And
Yeah.
we could help reach some of that potential.
Thank you, Richard. When you were consulting sports organizations, did you consult any sports organizations from Peninsula, especially Accra and the Bays region?
Sorry, from where?
Did anyone participate from Banks Peninsula for their consultation that you did with RSOs?
I don't know if I can answer that, to be honest. I mean, we're mainly working with Sport Canterbury and Canterbury Rugby Union, Canterbury Rugby League, Christchurch Metro Cricket. There were 6 of them in particular, but it was up to them to liaise with their clubs.
Okay, so Banks Peninsula, most of the teams they play locally So
Yeah.
they may have not been consulted in developing this plan, as I guess, based on what you said. Are you open to some feedback from various clubs or schools that come up with some ideas that you might be able to incorporate in this plan, or is it just this?
Yeah, I'm sure we are. I mean, the plan itself doesn't identify any site anywhere. The plan simply shows the methodology by which, or a high-level methodology by which we might identify areas that are poorly served. But the actual process of determining what grounds get upgraded and when is, if you like, the next stage. So that's the time when certainly we need to make sure that Banks Peninsula is represented.
Yeah, because we don't want to be like we understand if you involve community boards from all areas, that can get quite messy. But
Yeah.
I do feel that Banks Peninsula has quite a separate way we function, and it is very much that we need to know our areas and then also have relationships with those sports clubs.
Yeah.
So if just for broad purposes, to make sure we've included everybody that needs to be included, that would be really fantastic to be involved.
Yeah.
So that
for sure.
another layer, but
And just want to understand that whether I understood it correct. Could you help me with that? You're identifying existing areas that are being used as a sports facility. Is this plan open to incorporate that the patches of land that the council owns could potentially be developed for various communities to be used? Because on the peninsula, we don't have much flat land. And there are a number of areas that are owned by the council, but they are not developed as such.
Yeah.
Is that part of the plan as well?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. We do need to make sure, what we don't want to do is to lose existing natural turf park space for artificial turf or hard court surfaces. So one of the objectives of the plan is to look at other neighborhood type parks, other parks areas that are not used currently for sports fields that could have the development, particularly of these multi-sport zones. And the beauty of the multi-sport zone is they're only about 600 square meters. So you don't need a large area.
Okay.
So that, I think that type of facility very much lends itself to development in smaller, areas where we're not going to have any big impact on the Western Park.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Yeah.
I'd actually, so I'm Julian, I'm from Littleton. And I had a few comments. I was interested in your goals, so the 3 goals, and some of the things we're trying to achieve within those goals. I would have thought another one under goal 1, focusing on the participate where you live, is to do with community cohesion, because they're so important in terms of meeting your local people at your local park and playing football or whatever it is area. And also goal 2, playing for life, health. Surely be in there as goal as well.
I mean the goals are sort of quite broad. Each goal is supported by various actions. I'm just trying to look at, for example, with goal 1. One of the actions is to look at the local community, particular schools or privately owned fields, where there can be some synergy, because we don't want to be putting a new facility in where it might be next to a school that's already got one, for example. So it's very much looking at who can we work with already that might not be a council facility.
I just thought you could. Maybe those are additional things you could add in. But you must have thought about that. And also I was thinking, when you were mentioning the coastal, coastal hazards, that type of thing, and the parks being used for flooding another issue I'm aware of is that there's been quite a bit of discussion, say, about Allendale
Yeah.
domain and whether or not that's going to continue to be a domain in the future. And generally, the consensus is that it probably won't be. Or that's a recommendation. So that surely must be areas something your house was thinking about as well.
Yeah, well, Allendale, I haven't been there personally, but it's definitely on the map.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think one thing we may find out of all of this is that actually we've got more parks or more sports fields than we need. And that there could be some parks, not only in the Banks Peninsula, but it may be in the city that some areas could be have more trees planted on them and be turned more into part of the urban forest plan.
Yeah, yeah.
Particularly if we get, I mean, 12 artificial fields is quite a lot. Okay, it's going to take a bit of time to get those in the ground.
Yeah.
But the idea is that very much is expected to reduce the pressure on other areas.
And my last little question was just about following up from Nigel's question about the artificial turf and what happens to it kind of longer term.
Yeah.
And you mentioned infill. I presume you mean the little black particles that you have in all those.
Yes.
Is that what you meant?
Yes.
Yeah, because they are very small and end up everywhere, from what I can say.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So are they? Surely they must be an issue that the idea is to try and contain those rather than for them to be spread.
Yeah, I mean they're crumb rubber. In an artificial field for rugby and football, you have usually 20 millimeters of sand to hold the turf down, and then 20 millimeters of crumb rubber. But there are alternatives to that now. Cork has been tried. It tends to not last all that long. But certainly the crumb rubber is classified as a microplastic because it's less than 5 millimeters. Whereas the stitched hybrid turf is not a microplastic unless a bit gets broken off it, because they're much bigger than or much longer than 5 millimeters.
Okay, thanks. I'm aware we've used most of your time, but I just want to leave you on with this one thought, if that's okay. And it's probably around process more than anything. The question around why the council was informed and not us as a community board in regards to at the start of this process. And yeah, just ongoing, I do feel like we can give good input in regards to making sure everybody who needs to be taken into account with this plan on Banks Peninsula is so. So yeah, if that could be taken on board and processed, that would be fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for your time, Richard. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
Good job. That's really good.